So I was browsing through my subfeed this morning, and sure enough, Oscar Van Deventer had recently uploaded a new puzzle called the rocketstar. The moment I saw that thumbnail, I really wanted to try and build a puzzle that incorporated some artistic flair of that design into another puzzle that I also wanted to build. About 3 years ago, I built a puzzle called the Pyramoid, which was a kind of half-assed effort at doing an extended version of a three-faced Megamoid. I really liked the idea of that design, but I was never truly happy with how it came out, and I always wanted to try and do it again. And I figured that since I really wanted to do some more complicated and strange builds, I decided that I wanted to do a Gigaminx modification where I incorporated the Pyramoid design with some elements of the rocketstar. Okay, so the plan... Did I hit the camera? I'm sorry, I was just a little angry. It's funny because domestic violence. Okay, so the plan, and I'm going to refrain from using the term plan, is I want to, if you ignore 1, 2, 3, these scrambled faces here, I want to build up on this bit here and try and take this face, and this face, and kind of build them into a point in free space about this high. And I want to take all of these pieces here and I want to kind of turn it into the base with like the little rocket legs, 1, 2, and 3. I'll probably only be able to fit 3 here. And that leaves me with these 3 faces here, which are effectively just a Gigamoid modification. Now, if you're not familiar with the Gigamoid is probably one of my better known Gigaminx modifications, seeing as how it's the only one that I sold en masse. That is pretty much just a 3x5x5 but in dodecahedral form. And what I did for that was I just bandaged these 2 layers together and then I cut them down and sanded them as far as humanly possible. Now, I want to do a similar modification right here, which is pretty much just the same mod but on 3 faces instead of 2, but there's an added difference to it, which is I don't want to do any bandaging in this modification. I want to leave all of these pieces free turning and basically just a regular Gigaminx, but with a completely different shape. So, the first step here is I'm going to take this over to my bandsaw and I'm just going to start cutting these faces off, and I'm probably going to sand them down as far as I can too. It's called fashion, sweetie, look it up. Alright, so enough talking, it is time to get on with the meat of this build. So I took the puzzle over to my bandsaw and I just kind of eyeballed tilting the table and lining up the blade with the side of the Gigaminx. And after everything was lined up, it was time to finally start cutting. One of the great things about working with these geometrically regular shapes is that because I was cutting off 3 faces, I would only have to tilt the table once and then just lock it in place for all 3 cuts. After I made those cuts, I decided that since I was at the bandsaw, I would tilt the table to whatever number of degrees lined up perfectly with the edges, and then I cut off 3 edges underneath the puzzle as well. I don't really use degrees anymore to mark where I tilt the table, I kind of just line everything up by eye. I'm going to steal this quote from Duresta, but if it looks straight, it is straight, and that's pretty much the motto of my life now. And if you aren't subscribed to Duresta, you are missing out, dude. You're really missing out.
Alright, so I'm back from the bandsaw. I've done the cuts, but I've also sanded one of these faces. So now it's time to start thinking about how I'm going to approach getting this face down to the depth that I want it to be at, which is preferably at the bottom of this layer here. But right now it's only about halfway through this layer, so that is a big ask to get it to go down to that level. Now, when I make my Gigamoids, this is pretty much about 0.5 millimeter away from where I sand them to. So I don't really have the best experience on going any lower than this, and normally I wouldn't even think it was possible. But after examining the mechanism last night, I think it might actually be possible to sand down much further, but it requires some experimentation, and I only have 1 Gigaminx. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this centerpiece out, and I'm going to try and modify a replacement centerpiece. I'm going to put that in there, and I want to see if that affects the turning of the puzzle. I need to do this now before I start really cutting into this and doing crazy stuff. Come on. I don't think I need to take out much more than that. It is a very nice star shape though. I might try and incorporate that into one of my builds later. Oh wow. It's like the ghost of failures past. Ooh, way down in here. Oh, wow. This piece here, see that? And in fact some of these as well. You'll be seeing more of those later, but I'm not going to spoil the build too much. Now I just found in here the centerpiece that I'm looking for. And I've also got a couple of these edges here, and I'm going to do my best to explain what I'm thinking of doing. Oh, this is going to be very difficult. Did they have to make these puzzle pieces so god-awful to film? Okay, so this is a centerpiece from a Gigaminx, and I've boosted up the exposure a little bit so it's a little bright, just so you can see it a bit better. Now this is a center edge piece. These hang out here, and you can see there's this very big flange, this very big pronounced flange around the centerpiece, and that's what this piece is riding in. Whoops! You can see how it kind of likes to slide along that track. Now it's also holding on the surface under here. Even though I've always been afraid to cut below this little flange, and I figured that that's the deepest that I can cut, I might actually be able to go all the way to this underside surface without damaging the functionality of the puzzle. But I'm not willing to risk that on a Gigaminx because I only really kind of have one of these. I do have probably 2 or 3 in parts, but I only have one actual Gigaminx and I'm currently modifying it. Never do that, by the way. Always have a spare puzzle hanging around. I have enough spare pieces to get away with it, but that's just another rule that I like to follow. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get a little hacksaw out and I'm just going to cut this down as far as I'm willing to, and then I'm going to see if any of the turning has been damaged in any way or if the quality of the turning isn't up to par. The quality is another thing that I'm looking for. So let's give this a try and, well, see if it works. This is as much an experiment as it is a build. Oof. Okay, so that looks terrible. Now I want to see if just this bottom surface is enough. Oh, it's a good sign. Yes, it's a good sign, it works. That is good. That means that I can cut down, oh, as near as makes no difference, about a cubie's depth. So the thickness that you see here will probably be the thickness of this layer here, if all goes to plan. And if I can get it to be that thin, then what's stopping me from just very shallowly pillowing it so that it meets up with these pieces here directly. So that's really good. Now what I have to do is I just have to do a little more off-camera testing. I just want to make sure that I haven't jumped the gun here. I really want to make sure that this works because I'm trusting this for the mechanism of this puzzle to function properly. So I'm going to do a couple more tests until I fully trust this, and then I'm going to do it to the other faces.
Once I had pretty thoroughly established that my design plan was going to work, I went over to my bandsaw and I cut off the remaining couple of faces.
Yikes. I kind of don't know how to explain it. I've had 3 odd years of telling myself that this is not a thing you do, and now I'm just gung-ho doing it. So this face is one that's cut. I just decided to follow the this exposure is awful. I just decided to follow the gap between the 2 layers. And funnily enough, wouldn't you believe it, the blade of the bandsaw just kind of rides between the 2 layers. So the only problem with that is the screw head, which, as you can see, kind of sticks out above it. So what I'm doing is I'm just going about halfway in and then picking it up and rotating it. Luckily, I only have to do like 3 cuts in order to get it to go through. So that's one face.
I'm gonna try and get this face up to the same depth, because believe it or not, this face isn't as deep as this face. And then I'm gonna do this face here. Never pull that stuff out while the blade is running.
After all the cutting was done, you can see that the three faces were deeper than I had ever cut them before. I was really happy with how it was looking, and I was happy that I didn't cut too deep on any of the faces, which was something I was concerned about. But after that was done, I decided to take the puzzle over to my belt sander and sand the underside faces as well. But I was only sanding them to remove the bulk of the plastic, since I was going to be modifying them intensively later on.
Now this might look a little peculiar. Why am I sanding back and forth on a tool that requires power? The reason I'm doing that is because it allows me to lap the surface perfectly flat. I actually don't need it to be perfectly flat, but in order to understand how this mechanism works, I'm trying to make it as flat as possible so I can see where all the little flanges go in and around and underneath and over top of one another. And the reason I'm doing this is because I have never cut down this far in a Gigabees before, and I just want to make sure that I still know everything that I know about how the mechanism turns. You can see that I've already got the face turning here. This is actually the whole top layer that is now recessed inside this layer here. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding of what's going on here. But now that I've sanded this down, you can see here that, and I'll bring this closer up, you can see that I've decreased the head diameter of the screw head, and I've sunk that down a little deeper into the puzzle. I've done that on 1, 2, 3 faces. And look at how far I've cut down. Look at that. This is the top bit, 2 layers, and then this is like 1.5 almost. I think that probably about 1 millimeter down is the absolute maximum while keeping it flat. I think I've done enough cutting for now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these pieces off, these 3 layers, and I'm going to start extending all of these pieces. Alright, and now the delicate part of the operation begins. Alright, now I'm trying just to remove these layers. I don't like that. I don't want to disassemble the whole thing. Just trying to prise these layers out. Like that. All of these pieces are going to be extended. I have to take these pieces out as well, but that's going to be a little fiddly, so I'll do that in a second. But all of the faces that you see here that aren't cut into, they're going to be extended out. And get this, they're going to be extended out as far as they possibly can be. Now the reason that they have to be extended out that far is the same reason that the pyramid is the shape that it is. If you naturally extend all of those pieces out to as far as they can be extended, that is the shape that the puzzle comes into. So that's what I've been trying to do here, and also due to the unique way in which the puzzle geometry works, I can't have these 3 faces play a part in that actual shape. That's why I've had to cut them down as much as I did, and that's also why I had to make the pyramid out of a megamoid as opposed to just a regular Megaminx. It actually doesn't work if you try and build that puzzle with a Megaminx. Or, well, it might work, it's just that you have to find a way to slim down those 3 faces, or just leave them there, I guess. But anyways, that's all rambling and that's all complicated stuff. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of put all these pieces aside, and then I'm going to disassemble this section, get rid of these areas underneath here, and then it's time to prepare all of these pieces for extending. These pieces here I'm probably going to have to keep with the pile of extending because even though they're part of this area, they're going to have some extensions built out this way. So I'm just going to move all of these aside and get to disassembling. So I feel as though I should properly explain how it is that I actually go about mixing up epoxy sculpt. Epoxy sculpt, or really any epoxy putty in general, which is part A and part B, can actually be a little annoying to properly mix. So the way that I do it, or at least the way that I found works best for me, is really, really simple, it's really, really quick, and if you learn to do it properly, you can develop a really cool rhythm, and you usually mix up epoxy sculpt within a minute. Usually it takes 3 or 4 or 5 to get it mixed up properly, but I mix it up real quick because, of course, you know how much of this stuff I do. So let me show you what I do. So what I like to do is I like to sort of roll the two halves into a ball, and then I like to roll that out like so, and then fold it together. Roll, fold, roll, fold. And you develop a rhythm very quickly for mixing this stuff up, and I've been doing it so long now that it ends up just becoming second nature to me. So I can very quickly mix up quite a lot of epoxy sculpt, and it's a lot easier than just slowly kind of squidging it together and kind of trying to fold it and mix it up like this. It takes such a long time to do it this way. So this I find to be the best and most efficient and quickest way to do it. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this is just about mixed up. And you can check that by rolling it out, cutting straight down the middle, peeling it open, and having a look and seeing if there are any swirly lines inside. If there are, that's the separation between the lighter part B and the darker part A, and you want to keep mixing it.
After all the epoxy sculpt was mixed up, I started to pile it on each of the pieces, trying to be as sparing as possible because I didn't want to use too much, but as you can see here, I ended up using quite a bit.
I got safety-conscious people breathing down my neck, and rightly so. Taking my health a little more seriously, now that I do this a little more often than not, so I protect... Oh, for fuck's sake. Oh, look. I look like I'm about to enter Chernobyl. I was making Chernobyl references before HBO did the show, by the way.
As I was sanding each of the pieces, I tried my best to keep them as uniform as possible. All of these surfaces look pretty easy to sand, but they were actually really hard to get perfect, and it was very easy to sand too far or not far enough, and I spent a long time just kind of going back and forth and trying to refine the shape on each of these pieces and to get them to be as uniform as possible. I actually spent a lot more time doing this than I'd like to admit.
Check it out! All the pieces for what I'm supposedly going to call the skeleton of this puzzle are complete. Now, this area down here is what we're going to be doing next, but this is pretty much the shape right here. You can see these three faces that very steeply come up to a point about here in free space. So that's what I'm trying to work towards, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with these three faces, which encompass 2 whole layers. And I don't really know how this is going to look yet, but this is the kind of shape that I want. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to focus on this area down here, and I'm going to try and finish all of this off before I continue with any of these faces. I really want to kind of get this bit solid and done, and so I have a way to set this puzzle down. This is the bottom, by the way. So I have a way to set this down, and I can really kind of examine the shape and then work towards the next step in the build. So what I'm doing is I'm just cutting all the flashing off the outside of these pieces. I could just sand it away, but it's actually a little quicker with the blade.
And you want to spend a little time to make sure you do this properly, because you really only want to do it once. You don't want to have to go back and redo things properly that you didn't do right the first time. I say this from experience. So much experience. So I was digging through some drawers the other day, and I came across something that I forgot that I had held on to. It feels as though I should share it with you all today. And it's this here, which is hello? I'm trying to make the freaking camera work. How are you all doing? You've interrupted me during filming as I was in the middle of talking and stuff, but it's okay. How you all doing?
2 hours later.
Don't know if you can see that very well. Addressed to Nathan with what appears to be a delightfully drawn frowny face. Some point about 5 years ago, I must have bothered my sister to some degree, and she wrote me an angry letter. She put it in a little envelope and she slipped it under my door. This is about 5 years ago. I haven't opened it, and I'm not going to. 21st birthday. 10 years to go.
I did the extensions for underneath the puzzle in much the same way as I did the other extensions, and so after I finished rounding those off and reassembling the puzzle, this is what it looked like. I also got a haircut too, but that's not what we're talking about.
You find me in unfamiliar territory. This is going to be a little tricky. So I've got this all reassembled. I filled all of the pieces. It got really, really tedious and really boring, and it took many, many days to finish. And I didn't bother filming it because it just got too complicated and annoying and repetitive. So I filled all the pieces and I've reassembled everything, and I'll give you a close-up look at those pieces in a second. But I am now presented with a bit of an issue, which is this kind of triple intersection here. I want them to be kind of concave. So I'll try and give you a good example right here. So you can see I've got this piece here and this piece here sticking out. I want to make this area in the center kind of match this curve and then come out the other side. That's kind of my idea, but I don't really know how I'm going to go about doing it. I think the best way to approach this kind of a shape is I can just use this file that I've got here, which is rounded, and I can just very slowly carve out that shape. Now I think it's going to take a while, but I also think that it's the only way that I can do it that will work. I don't want to use power tools because I don't trust myself with the precision. There's a lot to cut through and I could very easily mess it up, and I don't want to have to go through the trouble of rebuilding all of these pieces again. So I think that's what I'm going to do. What was it I said about not using power tools? There we go. That's one. Not very good, but close enough. 2, and a bit hard to show them, but 3. So yeah, that looks pretty good. More sanding.
I continued to refine the shape on the belt sander, trying as best as I could not to nick any of the pieces that I had already finished sanding. And after I finished with all of that, I tilted the belt sander down, and then I started sanding some areas underneath the puzzle as well.
And that is what happens when an extension lets go. Luckily, I should be able to just clean that surface and then glue it straight back in, and paradoxically it will be stronger than it originally was. Super them, alright?
Okay, so now that we've done all of the sanding underneath here, you can kind of better see the shape that I'm going for now. I'm gonna have to sand these pieces a little more by hand, but that's fine, I'll do that later. My main hurdle to overcome at the moment is these three faces here. Now ideally this face at the top would be the same level as this kind of border is around here, and it's not that far to sand down, but this centerpiece is sanded down as far as I possibly can, so I can't bring that surface down anymore. So now that I've sanded this area here and you can see the little legs, 1, 2, and 3, this sits down like this and I have to build up to a point here, and then that's pretty much all of the shape done there.
I mixed up some epoxy sculpt and I put some partial extensions on each of the pieces. The reason I was only partially extending them is so that I could take them over to my belt sander and sand all those extensions down, and that way I'd have some guiding surfaces that I could then use to further extend those pieces.
You see, what I'm trying to do here, and I'll do my best to show you with what little light I have, is this piece is just kind of the bare extension. All I've done here is I've just piled on some of the epoxy sculpt and I've tried to mold it to the shape as best I can, but I know I'm not going to get it perfect. So what I do is after it all cures, I like to sand it down just on the top and bottom to kind of get those guiding lines. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sand these side bits down until I can better see where the extension needs to be. And then all I have to do is I have to build up on the areas that I haven't built out enough, and then I'll have the extension pretty much done after the second round of sanding.
After I'd finished sanding everything, I got some epoxy sculpt out and I built up on all of the areas that I needed to extend out further. And after all of that had hardened, I took the pieces over to my belt sander and I sanded them all down.
I apologize for the attire, but I'm bringing this back.
After I'd finished sanding all of the extensions, the only piece that I had left to build out on was the corner. Now this was going to be a really big extension and I didn't want to just build it all up with epoxy sculpt, so I got some cardboard out to try and hollow out the center, and then I just piled on as much epoxy sculpt as it took to build it out to as far as I needed. After reassembling everything, I made a paper template which was the shape of the corner piece that I wanted, and then I laid it on the side of the actual corner piece, firstly to reveal just how far I overextended the piece, and also how far I had to sand down. And now that everything was sanded, I decided to disassemble the puzzle so that I could round over all the sharp edges of each of the pieces. To give you an example of what this step does, the piece on the right is one that I've used the nail file and some Scotch-Brite on, and the one on the left I hadn't started sanding yet.
Thank God that's over. See, all you saw was like a little montage of clips. This took 2 days to sand. Alright, so I have split all of the pieces into their individual groups. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reassemble it as I cut the stickers for all of these tiny pieces. Even these tiny little ones here, if I can not hit the freaking desk with the camera.
The way that I go about cutting stickers is a little complicated, but I find it gets me the best result, at least for hand cutting stickers that is. I start by cutting a small piece of vinyl out, roughly the same size of the piece that I'm cutting the sticker out for. Because the vinyl of the sticker is slightly transparent, I can use one of my lights and hold the sticker up against it, and I can see a very clear outline of the piece on the other side of the vinyl. I can use this and a very sharp blade to cut out the sticker into the exact shape that I need it to be, and I don't end up having to deal with any overhangs or any really annoying cuts. After I had finally finished cutting out all of the stickers, which ended up taking quite a few days, this is it, the puzzle is finally done. This was a really interesting and fun project to do, and I learned a few things about the Gigaminx mechanism that I didn't know before. Now I decided to go for a warm-cold color scheme just because that was something that I felt would work for this puzzle. Seeing as how it's supposed to look like a rocket ship, I put the warm colors underneath the puzzle and I put all of the cooler colors around it. I went for a teal, light blue and green on the top of the puzzle, and I went for an orange, red and yellow underneath. But for all the other colors, I just decided to throw in whatever looked cool, and there was no real structure to that part of the color scheme. The teal and light blue look very similar in this camera, but in real life they are much easier to tell apart. Now I am not going to be scrambling this puzzle, even though it is just an unbandaged Gigaminx and I have solved one of those before. I really don't want to try and solve this puzzle. But just by making a few turns, we can start trying to test the turning quality here, and as you can see, it turns pretty well. I was surprised to see just how far the pieces overhang over one another, and yet they're still pretty stable. I mean, look at just how much of this corner piece you can see. The majority of the stalk is visible, and yet the corner piece only just barely rattles. The shape-shifting on this puzzle is also something crazy. You can see there are pieces sticking out everywhere, and I'm sure if I was to have the guts to scramble this puzzle up, it would look insane. Overall, I was just happy to try and meld a couple different designs together and try something unique and interesting that I had never done before. And I guess this is as unique and interesting as it gets. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.
I redid my shoes, look. You know what, change of plans. I want a few more colors here. Pink should do. I need more purple. Why do I do this to myself? Aha! Colors. Yes, I want that purple and fuchsia. Beautiful. Oh, sweet Jesus.